Well, when we speak Ojibwe and you want to tell somebody I'm Indian, usually what you can say is Indoodem. Or if you want to say I'm Ojibwe in particular, then you say Indoodem. But many times also, people will ask you what your clan is, or sometimes you'll just offer that information. And the way that you would say, my clan is the Eagle, you would say Indoodem ha'o Migizi, or Migizi Indoodem. And once you say that, Indians in the room who know who their clan is will instantly know, oh, I'm related to him. Or they'll say to you, oh, you're my clan brother, or I'm related to you. And so you have this feeling of a camaraderie that exists in the Ojibwe culture that you don't get in the dominant culture. For example, if you tell somebody you're introducing yourself in a room full of people who are English speakers only, and they're not Ojibwe, they're just non-Indian, and you say, well, my name is Brendan Fairbanks, and I'm from Oklahoma City. They wouldn't instantly say, oh, I'm related to you because, you're from Oklahoma City. Even the last name Fairbanks, for example, doesn't have much of it doesn't necessarily mean you're related. But when you say your clan and if you're an Eagle clan and somebody else is an Eagle clan in the room, you're instant family, you're instant relatives.
Before the establishment of the United States and long before Minnesota, our people organized our families, clans, and communities through kinship, which was a system of lineal descent. When the French and other Europeans first encountered large gatherings of Anishinaabe, they referred to them as nation. But for the Ojibwe, we relied on an indigenous concept of Odo de Mun to explain relationships. And this was how our ancestors organized their political and social worlds. These same political and social ties have remained strong within our homeland, evolving into what we today call the Red Lake Nation. Historically, the Red Lake people assumed an attitude of independence, which was an important political strategy during the time of the Nelson Act of 1889 and when reservations were allotted in Minnesota. Our leaders had to be vigilant for decades, since this policy did not end in the U.S. until 1934. Red Lake people and our leaders consistently opposed breaking up our homeland, selling the land, and sharing profits with other Ojibwe. This proved to be a successful and defining tactic in Red Lake history. Yet for many decades, it was the responsibility of our hereditary chiefs and citizens to protect and monitor the borders of our reservation, both land and water, from trespass by outsiders, including loggers, fishermen, missionaries, and tourists. The history of blood quantum dates from this troubled era. Kim Tallbear is a Dakota, an enrolled member of the Sisseton Wahpeton tribe, and a scholar at the University of Texas, Austin. Tallbear has studied the history of blood quantum and recent issues involving DNA analysis and how tribes have managed these complex issues related to enrollment and citizenship.
In the early 20th century, you had, yes, the federal government trying to impose this monolithic idea of Indian blood. And so they were thinking in terms of race. But that did some interesting things for us. I actually think the imposition of Indian blood and not a tribal specific blood at that time allowed tribes to have some more flexible notions of enrollment. So I'll give you a personal example, which I give in the book. My great-grandmother was Métis, and she was from Saskatchewan. She came to the United States. She got enrolled at Turtle Mountain. I guess there's a lot of back and forth between people there. But in 1941, they enrolled her in Flandreau Santee Sioux tribe, because she had Indian blood. She had no trace. She's not Dakota. She had no trace to the base rolls at Flandreau, but in 1941, they didn't care. And they were also still enrolling spouses and all children, including probably adopted children. Now this changes around World War II. So you have people joining the military. You have migration to urban areas. You have And then when that happens, you have many Native people going and marrying non-Natives, and suddenly tribes get very concerned. How are we going to ensure continuity in our enrollment and our families when we've got people moving away and coming back? And so blood quantum becomes much more prevalent at this time, and you stop enrolling spouses because they're trying to establish continuity between home and people who are living afar in far-flung places. And so that's really tied to that shift around World War II, the urbanization of American Indians.
During the troubled era of the establishment of reservations, new ways of thinking about citizenship or enrollment were introduced by the United States. Federal officials sought ways to determine who is eligible for allotments of reservation land or for boarding school, and began using blood quantum. At Red Lake, we did not begin using blood quantum as a criterion for membership as early as some other tribes. Our population was fairly small in the early decades of the 20th century. In fact, census records show that those of us enrolled at Red Lake today are descended from a fairly small reservation population and from ancestors with varying degrees of blood quantum. There is no mention of tribal enrollment or blood quantum in our first Constitution in 1918, a time when our population was fewer than 2,000 people. At that time, the practice simply was that if you were born on the reservation, you were eligible to be enrolled. At Red Lake, the first year that blood quantum appears in a tribal census was in 1929, so the practice of using blood quantum to determine tribal enrollment dates from that time. In these early years, our enrollment data at Red Lake was often recorded by an Indian agent or various employees of the U.S. Census Bureau. Blood quantum fractions were assigned in fairly random ways, so that children of the same parents were sometimes assigned different blood quantum. In fact, the same individuals were sometimes assigned different blood quantum from one census to another, as we see in these examples from 1931 and 1933. Our current enrollment practices rely on a base roll of tribal members from 1958, and the base rolls include members with a blood quantum of less than 1/4. In our Constitution of that same year, membership is outlined in Article 3, Section 1, with no mention of blood quantum. In 1961, the Tribal Council amended the Constitution to require 1/4 Red Lake Indian blood, challenging the born on the reservation practice of prior decades. In addition, while we sometimes think of urbanization as a new phenomenon, some of our tribal members have lived off the reservation throughout the past century. Federal policies, tribal ordinances, and constitutions aside, there is a very human dimension to the blood quantum story, which is the story of our relatives. How should we define tribal enrollment and citizenship in the future? What can our new Constitution do to define enrollment and citizenship? How might we consider Ojibwe cultural ideas as we imagine ways of defining enrollment and citizenship?